Hi, everybody. I wanted to take a moment to just share with you some of the things that have been on my desk or that I'm reading and listening to right now. So, one of the resources that I have actually returned to that's been around for quite a long time is called Nonviolent Communication. This is a book by Marshall Rosenberg. And there's a ton of resources that reference how to practice nonviolent communication. I just wanted to take a moment to sort of revisit it because there's a lot of good ways in which Rosenberg is basically helping to present how we can engage in more empathic communication and recognize the importance of actually just listening, being very intentional about how we give feedback, um, really getting good at understanding that the way that we talk sometimes uses words that are saying it's a feeling, but it's not really a feeling. It's really more like a judgment. And that the other thing that we tend to do is that we have been told to shy away from talking about what our needs are and how to actually get our needs met. So I think that this book is really helpful in just hearing some of the stories and examples, giving you some different ways to ask questions or to state like an observation. So just really quickly, a couple of things that to break down a couple of things that are important about nonviolent communication. One is that you are being very intentional to state your observation versus making a judgment. And so that looks like something like saying, instead of you're always late, you can say the meeting started, 15 minutes later. You were 15 minutes late for this meeting. And then this way, it's much less about like, when we say that you're always late, there's a way in which that is sort of like blaming this person for like who they are instead of just like making an observation, because there could be a good reason that this person may be consistently 15 minutes late for something and we just don't know what it is. And so it gives you a way to be able to start having that conversation and not immediately create defensiveness. The other piece is that it helps you start talking about your feelings. And so an example of that is instead of saying you're making me angry, you can say I feel frustrated. I feel sad, annoyed. I feel disrespected. I feel minimized. Anyway, all of the things is to really practice being able to actually say what you're feeling, and not to place a judgment on someone else or even responsibility in a way of what that other person may or may not be doing. You can make an observation of what they're doing. Like, when you stare past me, I feel like you're not listening to, I'm feeling, misunderstood and that I'm observing that you're not paying attention to me, because you're not really looking at me and responding to what I might be saying. So anyway, I'm still practicing this as well, but I just want to share with you that I think there's some different ways that we can work with nonviolent communication. The key to me about this approach is that it's really getting at how we can be much more empathic, and that when we learn to communicate differently, that people can respond to what we're actually talking about instead of responding often to the tone or to the accusation or to the feeling that they have just been attacked. That these are all ways in which we can be better in our own communication. So it is also helpful because it helps you to be clear about what kind of request we want to actually see be different. So, one of the things that happens is that there's a tendency to make a request and it sounds like a demand. And that is actually not then getting us where we want to be. When it's really important that people feel like there is a sense of choice, and that they have some sense of autonomy about what they're going to do, in response to whatever it is you might have just shared. So I have in the past talked about nonviolent communication with other groups, and it's really interesting how people respond to the violent part. So in many ways, I can care less about what you want to call it. This is literally the name of the approach, as it was named by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. However, I do think that with many approaches, there's often a name that can sometimes get in the way of people finding it useful when you're actually working with people. So the cool part about this is that NVC is finding, nonviolent communication is finding a way to be able to express what you feel and what you're thinking, and to do it in a way that isn't designed or creating guilt, isn't meant to have someone feel humiliated or shamed. And in a time that we are experiencing in our country right now, I think it is very important that we start to look at and practice skills that would help us move away from those communication that establishes blame or shame and immediately creates defensiveness. Imagine if we were able to own what we're actually noticing, just be able to make an observation, be able to name our feelings, talk about what we need, what we want to see be different, and just own that. And also to make requests so that we can see things move differently. And I think that's a piece that idea about making a request may be a place where a lot of us kind of get stuck, where we sort of get good at saying what's going on in our feelings, but then we're not necessarily inviting or requesting that behavior is going to actually change. And I think that is one of the things that we can all start to do better. So on my desk, one of the things that I am looking at and learning again is nonviolent communication. The other thing that I have been doing is listening to Brene Brown's new book, Strong Ground. There are so many nuggets in Strong Ground, from exploring power relationships to talking about, just that process of leaving work or leaving a meeting and coming home, and the shifts that we make to be present to our families. I think in almost every situation, wherever you're going, there are these needs to make these transitions, and we don't always pay attention to why we need to do that, how we go about making that transition, and what the impact is. And I know for myself, I have been thinking about like how I was taught to kind of come home, or when I would, come home to enter my parents' house and make sure to sort of announce myself, right? And say, hi, I'm here. Um, and I think that when we think about how we enter spaces, it's not always something that we're very intentional about. And so sometimes we can enter into spaces, or other people are entering into our space, and they may not be announcing themselves, or they may have had a really rough day. And so they need like time to decompress. And when you first see them, you're encountering them in a way that is making them have to respond when they're maybe not in the best space to be able to do that. So anyway, there's some really great pieces she, in her podcast, actually makes available. I want to say it's chapter 18. So you can actually listen to a portion of this book that talks about this shifting and what it means to, kind of calibrate when you're leaving from work and you're coming home. She even references how sometimes many of us, after, especially if we're driving to work and coming home, we'll sit in our cars and sort of mindlessly scroll for a while to sort of decompress before we enter into our the next phases of our day when we're coming home. So I think that is an important piece to maybe even think about. I know it gave me some pause to think about how I enter, as well as noticing how my family enters, what happens when my husband comes home, or what happens when my daughter comes home from school, and what is that whole process like. And so I wanted to mention that Strong Ground, Brene Brown, and the fact that she and Adam Grant are basically going chapter by chapter in her podcast, unpacking different each chapter of the book. So it's a great opportunity, whether you're reading the book or not, to get some insights and some nuggets from her podcast. And I know for myself, it's already given me a chance to do a little bit of pause and start thinking about things differently. Okay. So, the third thing that I wanted to share is that I have also been sort of binging on Mel Robbins' podcast. She has her latest book is called Let Them. And I think it's really important that when we say or you hear that word let them, what actually follows is let them, then let me. And I say that because I think it's really easy to feel like it's a very dismissive book when it really isn't. It's really a way to start thinking about and giving a pause to what other people, like, stop controlling what other people are doing, saying, what they might be about, and actually be much more intentional about what are you going to do. And so I like to, in my head, when I hear let them, I think let them and then let me as a follow up to that. So, in addition to that book and her podcast, there are two episodes in particular that have recently come out in the last couple weeks. One is where she features Dr. Todd Rose, and the other is where she features another friend of hers called Rich Roll. And Todd Rose, to me, the episode, and I'll try to make sure we link that episode here, that I felt like was a huge takeaway and just a lot of hope, is that his research looks at how people form decisions in private, and that sometimes the polls and the things that we're hearing about in the news are what people share in public, which is often not how they really feel, and it's also not how they are, what their behaviors are actually based in. And so I am still just really finding a lot of hope and thinking about that there are at least 8 things when it comes to success that we actually all agree on. And the other part of what he kind of talked about that I think is also really helpful is that there is more that we have in common and that we can have conversations around and find solutions for than the things that are different. And so in listening to me, I hope that what you will think about is that we could start asking some very different questions. I'm always talking about asking different questions and inviting people to actually share stories. It is the stories that people will hold on to. And when they care about you, they'll remember the story. They'll remember the thing that you shared with them. So um, when when you're thinking about how to connect, um, I think it's so much more important if we find ways to just connect with folks and not have the intention of trying to convince them to think or act differently. And so if we can start with that, start with thinking about the things that we have in common and that we all really want to see be different, and tell a story about it or ask someone to give you an example of what that could look like. There's more room that we can have moving forward related to that. And then the other podcast that she interviews her friend Rich Roll. One, what an amazing story that he has. It's just a lot of different pieces that are in there. And what I wanted to highlight for you is, one, take a chance to actually listen to this podcast. But the part that stood out for me is just this understanding that, I've known for a long time, but I think sometimes I forget. We have to remember that what we feel about something is going to change over, it can change easily. So I could wake up in the morning and be super tired. But if I actually get busy into doing something, then I actually feel energized. And so the statement that I am holding on to that he mentioned in the podcast is mood follows action. And how I'm connecting that is really thinking about Atomic Habits, which is another book I've mentioned at other times. But it's recognizing that we can start to change big things by just focusing on doing that 1% better. So there are times for sure that I wake up and I just don't even, I just don't even know where I want to start, and I'm not really motivated, and I don't want to go for my walk, or I don't want to take the time to do my meditation and some of the things that I know actually help me get grounded in my day. And yet, when I just start doing those things, then I feel better. And so, very often, I think it's too easy to sort of dismiss that we can actually change how we feel by just getting in motion. So that's what I wanted to leave you with. So I hope that you will take an opportunity to check out some of these resources just to be inspired and share them with other people. We all need things that help us to be motivated, to feel like we have a sense of hope, to know that we're not alone. And going back to the piece with Todd Rose, we what that means is that we will be in a situation in which we can stop self silencing ourselves, because there are plenty of places in our culture and our society where people are being silenced. And so I think it's important that we are not the ones who are doing that silencing for ourselves, and that we also have some strategies to help us be in motion, which is to remember that mood is going to follow action. So, I hope that you will consider checking out the Nonviolent Communication book. Definitely plenty of great nuggets there. Brene Brown's new book, Strong Ground, and then those two podcasts by Mel Robbins in the Let Them podcast. Look forward to hearing any of your thoughts from checking out those resources.